What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another edition of the Final Whistle Sports Podcast. As you can see, I have my Warriors gear on today. It's been a very nice weekend as a Warriors fan, dominating the Denver Nuggets. But we're not talking basketball today. We're talking football, and I have a returning guest. It has been over a year. It's hard to imagine that I have my favorite comedian that's been on the show, Dean Blandino, who is also the Fox Sports rules analyst for college football and the NFL, and the newly rehired for the XFL in a vice president role, as well as innovation of officiating. Dean, how are you? It's been a year. I can't believe it's been that long. How's everything going?
I know it feels like forever, and then it feels like yesterday at the same time. I'm doing well. Congrats on your Warriors. They're looking good. I'm not watching basketball at the moment because my Knicks didn't have a very good year. So I'm kind of off basketball for the moment.
Oh, I can't blame you for taking basketball off, because just based off of the Stephen A. Smith rants that I see about the Knicks, it can only create more and more turmoil for you guys. Yeah. But we're going to talk some football today. We're going to break some stuff down that we thought was really intriguing, as well as spring football actually started to take place with the USFL that took place this weekend. They have 8 teams. They had 4 games. 3 out of the 4 are relatively competitive. Dean, I wanted to get your understanding of what you think this league is going to be. I know you're just going to be back with the XFL for 2023. You also did work with the AAF. What has you seen in this past weekend, if you want at all, and what you see in the USFL?
Yeah, I watched quite a bit. And look, spring football, we've been through this. This goes back to the old USFL days and the XFL days. And now we've had the AAF, XFL, USFL. I think what the fans love football. They want more football. You think of the gaming aspect, sports betting, things like that. Live sports are such a valuable commodity, and anytime you can present, and when you're presenting the way they're doing on Fox Sports and NBC, it's a great way to present a football game, and you just have to kind of now build that momentum, and that's what we feel like we did with the XFL in 2020. We started to gain some traction within the individual markets, fan bases. The product on the field was really good. The presentation was really good, and I think that's what you have to continue to do. Unfortunately, in 2020, we couldn't really anticipate the pandemic. And I think we're all excited about the possibility of spring football, see how the USFL does. And then next spring, we're going to get going and just have a great team in place, and just really excited about what it can become.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this past weekend was a little bit of just trying to rekindle the flame that is spring football, especially with the gap since COVID hit that ended the AAF as well as XFL football. But for you specifically, with your new position getting rehired, what do you want to really emulate for the XFL to bring in next year to potentially help these players grow, as well as to bring in the commodity and audience that is spring football?
Yeah, it's about opportunities. That's how we always looked at it. Let's give players. There's so many really good players out there, and there's only so many spots on an NFL roster, right? 53, and then the practice squad. And so there are a lot of players out there that aren't on an NFL team that probably just need that opportunity to go out and play and get on tape. And we saw, whether it's the AAF, the XFL, players played, got on tape, and then ended up catching on with an NFL team. So that's what it's all about. And from a rules perspective, we feel like we've got a really good foundation from 2020. We don't want to, reinvent the wheel and change a whole bunch, but things have changed in the last 2 to 3 years, and technology has changed. So can we make it even better? That's the goal. We don't have to, we have a good foundation and a good blueprint in place, and there's little tweaks we think we can make to make it even more enjoyable for the fans, safer for the players, and just a better experience for everyone.
Absolutely. And I think some of the unique components was a lot of the microphones, more on players, more access with referees, as well as trying to understand how they're making calls, especially like in the rules if you're off site, looking at the play for instant replay, especially. And I think some of the components that I saw this weekend that were really compelling to me was the drone camera, as well as players actually having a camera on their helmet as another tool in that instant replay aspect. I was just wondering, what were your thoughts on those two components, especially with your background in replay and officiating.
Yeah, like we said about technology and how it continues to improve. And I think back to 1999 when we brought instant replay back into the NFL, and it was standard definition, and you had limited cameras. We didn't have things like Skycam and other things, that we have today, pylon cam and all these great innovations. And so when you look at drone cameras, you look at cameras on the helmets, officials, cameras, we've put cameras on the officials in their hats. All that, it has an aesthetic appeal for the viewer, but it also has a real benefit to, like you said, replay. It's another look. Maybe the camera in the second deck on the sideline didn't get the best look, but that camera that's on the official's hat or that sideline, pylon camera will get the look. So it just makes the experience better for everyone. And it helps on the officiating side, us get the good looks to make, better decisions.
So I'm honestly intrigued by this. I don't know if you would know the exact number, but how many more views do you think that the NFL or XFL, USFL are able to get with these other cameras? How many more angles or shots do you think that are useful?
Well, I think, and I look at like what Fox is doing with the USFL, you probably have just as many cameras as you would have at any game other than maybe the Super Bowl. So they're treating this, NBC is treating this like an A game, right? So there's different games, different levels. You have your A production crew, your B, C, and each crew has a different infrastructure, a different crew camera setup. And so you're going to see really good camera views, kind of similar to the best games on Sunday during the NFL season. And you'll see that for the XFL, and it's going to be, I don't know the exact, each game is going to be a little bit different and each play is a little bit different, but you're going to have every opportunity to get the great look that you need.
That's fantastic. Because I think, especially from just an audience perspective and being a fan, you're able to just being able to see some of those views that we don't usually get to see has really opened up spring football. Because especially in the NFL, even the NC and college football, you get the refs get the views that sometimes we can't see, which has kind of been unique with how spring football has approached it, trying to showcase all of the views, how officials are looking at each play and trying to interpret what the ruling is. And one thing that I wanted to actually go into was actually the new NFL rule that was actually announced with overtime, with how now both teams in the postseason only, that they're both going to get the ball. And I feel like, especially with how it pretty much became the Kansas City Buffalo rule, it felt like, with how that just pretty much the game was fantastic going back and forth. And then Buffalo loses the coin toss, never got the ball. I just wanted to get your opinion on, do you think this rule is going to be approachable, as well as how they're taking the interpretation of like almost with college that everybody gets the ball at least once?
Yeah, I don't think I've always been in the camp of, I don't think you have to change overtime. I like the idea of sudden death. I think you have 60 minutes to decide the game. And then, you do need an overtime system, but you have to decide. You don't want a whole bunch of ties, so you've got to figure out a winner. And the longer you go and the more possessions you give each team, the less likely, especially in the regular season when you only have a 10-minute window, the less likely you are to get a winner. So I think that's part of the reason why they went with postseason only. The numbers in the postseason related to the coin toss were compelling, in that the team that won the toss the last 10 years as the postseason, the overtime rules have evolved, was winning 83% of the time. That's a high number. You'd like that to be closer to 50%. So again, the postseason, it's win or go home. So I'm good with it in the postseason. I do think, an element of sudden death is exciting. I think you have to figure out, keep all three phases involved in the game, offense, defense, special teams. And make sure that you keep an element of sudden death to where the game can end on any one play, right? That's exciting. Whereas I feel like the college system, while it works, it's not true sudden death where, even on that first possession, even if it's, an interception, whatever it is, the other team still is, the game's not over. And so it works for college. I like the NFL idea of sudden death. And I think this will kind of, lessen the outcry over a game like the Bills and Chiefs. And you're right. That was probably the last, push that was needed to get this passed. But, again, I've always liked sudden death.
I've always liked sudden death as well. I just thought it was a unique component because like in so many past postseasons that, again, like you said, the numbers state that as soon as they get the ball, they're going to end up most times out of not that they're going to be the ones coming out victorious. But I just kind of don't understand why the Bills Chiefs game, because of how such a great game it was, led to the final, like being the final straw. Because we've had so many great postseason games and that it's finally being approached in 2022. Do you just think that I feel like the component of social media and potential backlash that it's kind of received the rule led to, and also an interpretation of it being changed? I just wanted to see if your opinion on that.
Well, there's no question that's a factor. They're not going to change rules based on fan reaction, but you have to solely based on that. But you have to understand that those are your customers. Those are people that are watching your game, and it matters, right? It matters their opinion because they're the ones that are going to be paying money to go sit in the stands and watching games and doing different things like that. And spending money on merchandise. So it's important that you take those things into consideration, but you also have to consider, right, player safety, competitive equity, officiating consistency, all those things go into rules change discussions. So I think, again, the outcry after that game was there. There was a lot, right? Social media is obviously kind of, it's certainly made that a bigger deal than it was 15, 20 years ago. But again, I think ultimately it was those postseason numbers, that 83%, you win the coin toss, you're winning the game. I think that ultimately, had that been closer to 50%, I don't think there would have been any change, regardless of the Bills Chiefs, because you got to see the following week, right? The Bengals win the game by playing defense, getting an interception, and then winning on that next possession. So it kind of cuts both ways.
Absolutely. And then I know College Football instituted their new overtime rule this past year, but I also wanted to get your take on the 2-point conversion. I really don't understand it. I know they want to try and shorten the game by going to the 2-yard line instead of from the 25. But at that point, when you just want to adopt the NFL path of how overtime works, because I feel like now you're just going to be with, like, even last year, the Penn State Illinois game went 8 overtimes. I can't remember what it exactly was.
9
8 or
overtimes,
9.
yeah.
And now you're just going to be breaking records because it's just one play at the 2-yard line. And I know the USFL is actually taking that approach. You get 3 attempts from the 2-yard line. Whoever has the most attempts goes from there. I just wanted to get your take on that rule as well.
The NCAA rule, that was really driven by player safety. And so when you're playing 60 minutes and then you have to play, I think back, it was 2018, LSU and Texas A&M played a game that was 7 overtimes, and it felt like another 3 hours, but it was considerable number of extra snaps that these student athletes are playing. And thankfully that game was late in the season, and it wasn't early September in 100 degree heat with 100% humidity. That's where you really worry about, the safety element. So you think about that game, that Penn State Illinois 9 overtime game. Yeah, it went 9 overtimes, but the number of snaps was consistent with a 2 overtime game because you're only doing the one play. So I see both sides to it. I don't think college will ever go to an NFL style overtime. I think that's too drastic of a change for the college game. There's tradition and there's other things involved. It's almost like stopping the clock on a first down. That's probably somewhat of an outdated rule, but I'm not sure they're going to change that anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree, because I know the USFL, I think, is adopting that rule also with under 2 minutes, stopping the clock on first down.
Which makes sense. I like it inside 2 minutes, but the whole game, 13 minutes to go in the first quarter. Why are we stopping the clock?
Yeah, because I feel like at that point, it's why the NFL has, like, I think I can't remember the number off the top of my head. It's almost like 30 minutes minimum shorter in basis of like time over the entire game in comparison to college.
Yeah, on average. Yeah, on average, it's significant. It's probably closer to 15 minutes shorter on the NFL side, but the colleges, they have such a wide variance. They're, 20% of all FBS games were over 3.5 hours last year. Where NFL, it's rare when a game goes over 3.5 hours.
Yeah, and I know I was actually talking to one of my buddies about this. We were talking about some of the overtime rules, and he brought up a unique component of saying that, like you said, the tradition of college football is not going to push the change that of the NFL going to that drastic of a change. But I feel like the student athlete element he also brought up was a huge component, that they're still also this term student athlete, that there's still player safety. You don't want to have those crucial injuries, unlike in the NFL where they're doing this for a living. I just wanted to see what your take on that was, with how much player safety has evolved, especially in college.
Yeah, no question that's a consideration. And in both NFL and college, again, when you think of rules, player safety is number one. That's always been the case as long as I've been involved. But when you think about college, the challenge that the NCAA has with rules changes and consistency is you have different conferences. You have different levels of football. So when you make a rules change, it's not just for Ohio State and Alabama, right? You're talking about Division II, you're talking about Division III. That's a different level of student athlete, a different skill level, but it's the same rules. Where the NFL, right, it's 32 teams. They're all pretty much evenly in terms of skill level. And so you can create greater consistency. So the NCAA, it's a very challenging process, and you have to take in a lot more factors in terms of the level of play, because like I said, you're thinking about D2, D3, all these other things, FBS, FCS. It's not all, Alabama and Georgia, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, because they're, especially the smaller schools on those lower levels, they don't have as much of the opportunity as well as the entities that they get, unlike an Alabama or a Georgia, where football is almost like life or death. And that
the resources are much different. Yeah.
So now I kind of want to make a transition here, because I know there was a couple of controversial calls that have taken place in this NFL season. I actually wanted to hear your breakdown of a couple of them, just from the officiating standpoint. Of course, the number one was what happened in the Dallas San Francisco playoff game, where they get the ball down, they didn't hand the ball to the official, time runs out. And I know it states it clearly in the official book that the official has to spot the ball for play to resume. I just wanted to see why was there so much of a disconnect from a player to the official in the rule book, do you think, that they just didn't comprehend?
Yeah, that's one that teams practice all the time. Dallas practices that. Now every NFL team is going to practice that hurry up, that they talk about situational football, end of game scenarios, out of timeouts. And so, Dallas practiced that. It's just when the play that they ran with that much time remaining on the clock and no timeouts, everything had to be perfect. And if one thing goes wrong, you're not going to be able to get the ball down. And several things, right? That play is designed for the runner, whoever it is. In that instance, it was Dak, to slide sooner, not go 15, 20 yards downfield, slide at 10 or 12, because obviously that's going to take less time off the clock. Get the ball to the official. It's going to be the umpire who's coming from the offensive backfield that's going to be trailing the play. And so if you're outside the hash, get it to the hash, wait for the official. If you're inside the hash, turn around, wait for the official. Don't give it to a teammate. And then once that happened, right, you run a little bit longer, it takes a little bit longer. The ball doesn't end up in the official's hands right away. It ends up on the ground. Now it's going to be almost impossible to get that ball spotted. And we saw what happened. And that was just a critical situation that you just got to be perfect. And it wasn't in that time at that time.
Yeah. And then when Dak hands the ball off to the center, the center should also, I feel like the whole team on the offensive side of the ball would know in practicing those situations that the official has to touch it. Do you just think it was just a lapse just because of the moment?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. They practice it. That's why you practice it, because if you don't practice it and it's just that's why we practice fire drills in school, right? So you know what to do in a real emergency. And I think, they just didn't get it done, because even the offensive linemen, that you've got to clear a path for that umpire to get to the football, to put it on the ground. And the umpire had to fight through bodies. And I think it just kind of one thing led to another. It was a snowball. And like I said, everything had to be perfect. And one little thing goes wrong, and then you end up with kind of what happened.
Absolutely. And then the other one that I wanted to bring up was what happened with Detroit, Baltimore early in the season, where the clock most likely should have ran out, I think. And then Justin Tucker ended up getting the 66-yard field goal to win the game, make history, et cetera. I think there was, I don't know if it was a timing error. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there was a little bit of controversy in that Detroit-Baltimore game towards the end. I was wondering if you could give a quick insight on that one as well.
Yeah, that one, there's, again, end of game situations are so critical, and you've got several people working together. You've got the officials, you've got a clock operator upstairs. The clock operator, that's the official time, right? What's on the scoreboard. They have to watch for signals. They have to make sure, the officials have to rule, is the player in or out of bounds at the sideline, stop the clock, wind it. That's one of those deals where, again, it's just you got to practice that at the end of the game and make sure everything is perfect. And unfortunately, and I have a lot of people that follow me on social media that are Lions fans, and I feel for the Lions fans, because that was another situation where they were kind of on the wrong end of the deal. And it feels like that's something that happens to the Lions more recently, as you think about some of the calls. But, hopefully that stuff kind of evens out over time, and the Lions will be on the right end of some calls here.
Without question. And then before I let you go, I had a couple more things that I wanted to ask. I just wanted to see if you had like a rule change, either in the college level or the NFL level, that you would like to see potentially either changed, altered, or just anything that you have really seen this past year that you want to hopefully see some improvement upon.
Yeah, well, on the college side, I mentioned it earlier. I'd really love to see, from a timing perspective, just stop the clock inside 2 minutes on first downs. I feel like that's something, that rule, it was in place for mechanics that are now, outdated, and the game was different when that rule went in place. So I think to continue to keep the game moving and keep the game flowing, I'd like to see that. On the NFL, I like what the NFL is doing with giving the officials more video assistance in real time. But I just think, just be transparent about it, not announce after discussion, the ruling on the field was changed. Just say, after review, it's an incomplete pass, things like that. Just be transparent. Keep the game moving. I like the seamless aspect of that. And just so we're not trying to do it, behind anyone's back. We're just out there. This is what happened. We got information from upstairs with the video, and we changed the call, and we can keep the game, moving, and everybody knows what happened.
Yeah. And I feel that's a great point, because I feel like sometimes when they're trying to change a call, it sometimes takes a little bit too long. It's almost like they're trying to find something, when, especially like from official perspective, if you don't see it or you can't make that 100% claim, it should be the ruling on the field stands. From this is how I was taught as a official anyway. But I just wanted to get your perception on that. If they sometimes are almost looking too hard to find an opportunity to switch the call, sometimes in replay.
Yeah, absolutely. The basic premise of replay is the call on the field is correct, and it has to be obvious that it's incorrect in order to make a change. And we always want to avoid being technical and trying to find and kind of nitpick and trying to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to find something wrong. And what we've seen through replay and through video, assistance, is that the officials are right 90-something% of the time. And so we need to have it there for that small percentage of plays where it is a mistake, and it happens because the game happens so quickly, and the officials are human beings, and they only have, their perspective, and it happens in real time, and they can't run it back in slow motion. And so that's what replay is for. And it should be a small percentage of plays, and it should be when it's obvious, and not get too technical when you're looking at those plays to kind of look for a mistake.
I completely concur. I think sometimes that just trying to be, not trying to make a incorrect call, but trying to be as, I don't know if they're trying to be as intent as possible of trying to find something in moments, that sometimes creates the sometimes the replay is going five almost occasionally. Like I believe that you actually were on the call for this game, the Indiana 2-point conversion. I think it was against Penn State when he hits the pylon on the 2-point conversion. And they were almost seamlessly trying to look for like 5-10 minutes to see if the ball had fallen out when he had already called it on the field that it was that he had hit the pylon.
Most of the time you'll know when it's going to stand, right? You'll see it. That play was so close, and you had to look right down the line. And if you couldn't change it with that look, there wasn't going to be any other view that gave you any other answer than the call on the field stands. But sometimes in a situation like that, it's the end of the game. This is the game ending. The replay official doesn't want to, have something come up later to say, hey, we had another angle. They're trying to exhaust all the resources. And I understand that, but there are most of the time, hey, that's the look. It's so close. We're not going to change it. And it is what it is. The ruling on the field stands.
Absolutely. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you, Dean, was what are your expectations a little bit for the rest of the spring football season of what is now the USFL for this year? And then you guys will be included in that next year. But what do you want to see, hopefully, because they had millions of views. The turnout was relatively great, depending on Fox or NBC, depending on views, et cetera. Because, again, as you mentioned, we all love our football. But what do you want to see throughout the rest of this season to see if that to potentially coin spring football as a success in 2022?
Yeah, I'm just interested to see how it all plays out this spring. I think, like I said, the appetite is there. I'd love to get through a full season, and then we'll get going. We're already looking at things for the XFL and rules, and we've got meetings and so I'll be watching the USFL and seeing how they're doing, and hopefully, get through the whole season and keep that fan engagement, because all that means is that people want spring football. And so that makes us excited for next spring, 2023.
Without question. Dean, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule and joining me today on the Final Whistle Sports Podcast. I just wanted to remember, please go follow all of his content. Go follow him, watch him on Fox Sports. He does great work for the NCAA as well as the NFL and rules analyst. And now you got to be tuned in even more for 2023 when he's going to be overseeing the XFL when it comes to officiating. Dean, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. That was another edition of the Final Whistle Sports Podcast.